Good morning. As I said before, happy holidays. Welcome to the Communications Alliance. This is another webinar in our continuing session of webinars. We've done a few this year. We're going to do a lot more next year. But today's webinar is all about AI governance. We're going to talk about a framework ensuring that AI systems are ethical, they're transparent, and they're accountable. As AI continues to evolve, it brings a lot of opportunities to our industry especially, but a lot of risks, such as biases and privacy concerns. Today we're going to discuss a little bit about the history of AI, the types of AI there are, and potential societal impacts. We're going to talk about the Colorado AI Act, which aims to prevent algorithmic discrimination. Easy word for you guys to say. We're going to talk about shadow AI, which has some of your employees using unapproved AI and the risks it can pose. And finally, we're going to look a little bit about how to achieve AI, trustworthy AI, through a comprehensive governance program. By the end of this presentation, you'll understand why AI governance is essential and how it could be implemented effectively. I'm going to turn it over now to the chairman of our Cloud Communications Alliance Government Affairs Committee, Mark Iannuzzi. Before I do one last thing, remember to sign up for Cloud Communications Alliance Cloud Connections in St. Pete, April 14th to the 17th. It's going to be our best meeting ever. We have some 30 some odd sessions already planned out, great speakers and some really good social events. So make sure to sign up, go to cloudcommunications.com, and you can kind of see how to sign up there. And enough of this cheesy advertisement. Mark, let me turn it over to you, and thank you for doing this today.
Hey, my pleasure, Joe. Thanks so much. Good to see everybody, and thanks for joining in. Joe, you're looking good. I like the festive thing. It is a week away from Christmas, so happy holidays, everybody. There's a few things. There should be a QA tab at the bottom of the your session screen. Any questions, please? It's an open discussion. We're delighted to have this conversation, so please do that. So anyways, as Joe, as you indicate, the AI revolution is upon us. It's really going to reshape our lives and businesses as profoundly as the internet did, or the whole mobile technology landscape, and heck, cloud services itself. It is quite transformative. And just like those other transformations, right? Those who adapt and are going to and can seize the opportunities by AI is going to have an opportunity to thrive, and the converse is true as well. Hesitate and you risk being left behind. And so one of the things here is, what the heck does that mean about your corporate, your business, corporate governance? It's really no exception. And so in the face of a powerful new technology, if you don't really have a mindset towards it, it's basically indecision. And indecision is like a decision. So, it has a cost to it. So hence why we wanted to get together today. The session is really kind of, we're looking to do 5 things. Joe, you touched on a few of those. Where we are in the AI revolution. We just want to kind of center on that one. We're going to take a look at some of the benefits and risks, kind of level set. Regulatory, right? So that's just one of the things that we at our committee tries to make sure we're on top of what's going on in regulatory across the globe and locally. But then into the meat of this thing, well, hey, where in the heck do you start on AI governance in your company and how to build some of those things? And there's a risk management framework concept to kind of bring it all together. So that's our goal, and we're delighted to be here. Once again, any questions, please put them into the comment, the QA tab. So why don't we start out here? We got two incredibly knowledgeable people on this subject, and I really appreciate them being here. And so, Jack, let's start off with you. Hey, tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what's going on, and then we can kind of dig into, well, what does AI really mean today from your perspective?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, first of all, I want to say the opinions that I state today are not those of my firm, Brownstein. They are I own them, which allows me to speak freely. So I have the advantage of being an old guy and a technical guy. My first program that I wrote was on punch cards in 1974 at Lehigh University. And then I've watched technology blossom. And in 1989, I took my first AI programming course in a program called Lisp. And then after an 18-year career in software engineering, I went and got a law degree and focused on naturally patents, patent litigation and writing patents. And then in 2018, when it became obvious that the world was changing and cybersecurity and privacy were going to be a big thing, I shifted over into cybersecurity and privacy and have now added AI. Susan?
Hey, I'm Susan Duarte. Just like Jack, my views are my own. I am a partner at Rashline and Donahue. I found my way here after a long career in-house in the tech industry. So like Jack, I have a long history and I have a really big passion for helping clients navigate through these thorny legal issues so that they can deliver these innovative products and services to the market.
Very good. Thanks. So, Jack, why don't we start off with you then? What kind of walk us through where do you AI is a big deal, but it's a maturing technology as well, and so maybe you can help us kind of anchor where things are at and why is that important as we try to create a governance policy.
Right. So, AI has been around for a long time. And right now we're in artificial narrow intelligence portion of AI. And what that means is AI can do narrow tasks such as play chess and meet the Turing test. Alan Turing passed away in 1954, but he had this test where if the results are indistinguishable from a human, then it meets the test. In other words, if you can tell a machine is playing the chess game, then it doesn't meet the test. And shortly after he passed in 1956, there was a conference at Dartmouth College, which officially started the AI era. So it started in 1956, and I was a skeptic back when I was programming in it in 1989, but now I am no longer a skeptic. It is here, and we've been through a couple winters and summers, but there's no turning back at this point. So we're kind of in between ANI and artificial general intelligence in an era called broad AI. So artificial general intelligence will be on a par with humans. Again, we're not there yet. And then the next step would be artificial intelligence, which would outperform humans. And, you can think about the Terminator movies for that one. So you can probably find a lot of things online with people talking about doomsday scenarios. So that would be ASI. So there are four elements of AI: technology, autonomy. Of course, there's a human role in this. We provide the objectives and we provide the training data for the AI models. And then the fourth element is the output of the AI. Next slide. So unfortunately, there's no one definition of artificial intelligence. The first definition came out in that conference in 1954. But if you look around the world, there's a lot of different definitions right now. So I pulled one out here of a US statute, and that's a AI definition. But then below that, the second bullet is generative AI. So this can be confusing to people because generative AI basically generates new content like images, videos, audios, text, and other digital content. But it's a subset of overall AI. Next slide, please. So here are just a few examples of the application of AI. And this list is very long. And if you turned on your TV recently and watched a commercial, you see all the phone makers now have an AI product within the phones, and they're pushing it very heavily. So everyone has access to AI. at this point. If unless you're a hermit living out in the woods without any access to the internet or a phone. Next slide.
Yeah, well, hey, Jack, on that, the fact that this is just it's profoundly been changing a lot of people's activities, right? And to think that we're still really in a nascent development of this stuff is quite interesting. I thought we'd bring in Susan if talk about some of the, we talk about risks and benefits and so forth. So how can we, what is some of the things that we learn in terms of how we balance out the risk benefit? Susan? Are you there?
Sorry about that. Everybody wants a lawyer to be muted, right?
Yeah.
I think, however we define AI, we can all recognize that AI is a transformative technology. So a recent study from Frost and Sullivan shows that 89% of organizations believe AI and machine learning will help them grow revenue, boost operational efficiency, and improve customer expectations. And even Congress, who released a task force report yesterday, recognizes that AI has tremendous potential to transform society and our economy for the better. But that doesn't come without challenges. And I think if you've worked with clients, if you worked in-house or you are just a business person in-house, you can see that there's definitely a tug of war and a tension between parties that are in favor of the increases in the productivity and competitive edges. We can go to the next slide. And it's true because AI helps businesses streamline their processes and use data to make better decisions. And AI even works above scale, and it allows humans to focus on higher level tasks that only a human can do. AI can improve the speed of business, it can improve services, and help you with talent management. It allows you to have even more innovation, and it can also offer competitive advantages. So if you are not using AI in today's world, you may start thinking that you're at a competitive disadvantage. But with all these great things, we have to balance them with potential harms. And there are harms with AI. These harms include harms to individuals, so using the models inappropriately to make credit or employment decisions that are ill-informed or don't have proper bias controls, or also profiling behavior of people or looking at their health, predicting health outcomes. Organizations can also experience reputational harm, and this week we saw Character AI is being challenged in court for allegedly failing to implement safeguards and guardrails to protect their users. And Google is also named in this because they are an investor as an aider and abettor. We see legal liability in the case I just mentioned, copyright cases, product liability, false advertising. We see TCPA implications. Of course, there's monetary loss, fraud schemes. You can manipulate financial systems potentially. And then there's also this big fear of taking away jobs from lower earners. And then, of course, there's societal harms, maybe depression and things of that nature. And then environmental harms with the need for more data. There's also this greater need to store the data, and AI servers can have the potential to create waste.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Susan. One of the things when we go over this stuff, I think a number of these things have crossed people's minds, but it's interesting how when we have these seminal events like this new technology, and it really pulls up a lot of things that's important to us as people and businesses and society, and so to have a chance to reflect on it is it's kind of like taking a new breath. One of the things that was mentioned here was about bias, and I find that a curious word here, and what that means. So, Jack, maybe you can help us understand a little bit about this bias area. What does that really mean to in this AI landscape?
Right. There's a lot of potential for bias within AI, and here are the ones I collected. Implicit bias. We all have subconscious prejudices and stereotypes. So humans are building the models, so the human bias gets into the model.
Yeah.
You can have statistical bias. You can have non-representative samples in your model. Temporal bias, things change over time, right? Unfair bias is self-explanatory. Of course, machine bias, systematic error or deviation from true values. Uh, Cognitive bias, that's another human one that gets put into the AI. It's inaccurate individual judgment or distorted thinking. Societal bias. Automation bias is one of my favorite. When I look at these commercials now on TV where everyone has access to AI and they can ask AI a question. So automation bias is when you get that answer back, you think it's right. You don't question it. So that's the bias that, again, believing AI is always correct, which is I find is one of the more dangerous biases. Selection bias, if you don't select the right data for training your model, that bias goes into the model. Confirmation bias, that's where we seek out opinions that are basically echo chambers to our own beliefs. And projection bias, projecting our preferences, beliefs, and attitudes in the model, in the training the model. Next slide.
Yeah. So, Jack, if we could, on that one over there, for me, when I look at these things here, it's, we've heard in our lexicon here about fake news and, and all this kind of stuff where it's basically saying, hey, well, what is the information presented to me and can I really trust it? Do I know what it is? So to the extent we have AI, large language models, whatever, curating the data, and looking into it, you need to be very mindful that you can trust what the heck is coming out and how did you influence it, right? So I think seems to be the key piece behind some of your bias statements there.
Correct.
So, all right, well, hey, maybe we can switch a bit here and talk about regulatory and what's going on with respect to that. So, Susan, I thought maybe perhaps you could say, hey, what's going on with regulatory areas? Because, hey, we got to have, where is some of these quote unquote, I don't know if I want to call them guardrails, but they're basically, how does the regulatory things across the globe, because it's a key thing, right? This is a global thing. So.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. At least 25 countries and counting have AI regulation, and we know that more are forthcoming. Europe, which is the big news headline, has the AI Act, and it follows a risk-based approach. So you have sort of tiers. Some are banned, some systems of AI are banned, some fall into a high risk category, and they're regulated in that way with a lot more oversight, and they have to be assessed before they're put into market. Generative AI is not considered high risk, but has some transparency requirements. And then it goes down from there, including general use AI, which is more of a limited risk. We also see that other countries are following this sort of Brussels effect. We're seeing similar legislation in Australia and Brazil. And then we're also seeing some countries taking more of an approach to let industry develop standards. So India recently released a playbook for developers that sets forth voluntary industry standards on how to create a responsible AI system. And just touching briefly, and then we'll get into this in more detail in a minute, the United States, at my last count, has about 148 bills introduced in Congress, many of them touching on national security, what to do about copyright, empowering NIST to create standards, disclosures for AI, what you need to say when you're using it. And of course, the Biden administration has come out with executive orders, and we're seeing enforcement and rulemaking in the space by federal agencies like the FTC and the FCC. And states are also proposing laws, which Jack's going to talk about.
Okay. Well, thanks, Susan. So, hey, Jack, so why don't you then let's unpack things here about what's going on here in the U.S. Joe mentioned the Colorado AI Act, so help us get a grip on that.
Right, and I should mention that I am based in Denver, Colorado. That's where my office is. And I was actually talking to one of the state senators during a privacy panel. He was working on the Colorado AI Act at that time. And at that time, they were looking to Connecticut. They were following very closely what Connecticut was doing. And then all of a sudden, Connecticut stopped, and Colorado went ahead and promulgated the Colorado AI Act, which is the first state to do so for a comprehensive AI Act. And the focus is on controlling algorithmic discrimination that would result in an unlawful treatment and consequential decisions. And you see a list of consequential decisions. So in other words, if I'm a human and I'm trying to get a decision on insurance or housing or healthcare, and AI is involved, then this act controls how that's going to be done. It's enforceable by the AG only, and the governor also at about the same time put together a task force to look at this law. It doesn't go into effect until February 2026, similar to the EU AI Act. So the governor and this task force are going to be looking at the law to make sure it doesn't stifle innovation. That's one of the real concerns with some of the promulgation of AI law, is that you want innovation while at the same time controlling the risk, but you don't want to kill innovation through regulation. So it's going to be interesting to see what that task force comes out with. I reviewed the law. I already see one area which I would fix, but I'm not going to go into the details at this point. Just be aware it's coming in February 2026. And if you're operating in Colorado, you need to be aware of it. And I would say, too, we have, this is, I think, going to follow the privacy state legislation. We now have 19 states that have promulgated privacy laws, and I expect the AI laws to follow suit. This is a little bit out of step with the way things were done in the past. California is normally the leader. They led on the privacy, and then Colorado and Virginia followed. But in this case, Colorado is the first one. Next slide.
Yeah. So hey, Jack, on that, we could. So the previous slide about globally, and then here nationally, we have, communication service providers is our membership. Anything that's jumping off the page to you here regarding like the Colorado Act as to what's going on there? And then as a communication service provider, you provide services across the fruited plain, so you're in Colorado in one day and in California, you got customers across. How does somebody keep, do you have any information or ideas as to how somebody in a communications sector really can keep their head above water and some of the regulatory changes?
Well, yeah, great question. I expect these companies, which are service providers to their customers, they may have customers that are more affected by this Colorado AI Act than other companies. And I expect their customers to want to contractually obligate them to understand what AI they're using and how it's being used, and to make sure it's not being used improperly. So I would start to look for contract language and be ready to negotiate those contracts.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, hey, Susan, why don't we then, we've covered some good ground here, everybody. We've been talking about, hey, we got this transformative thing taking place in AI, and it's going to continue to grow and evolve. We look at there's global opportunities and risks that we're trying to manage. The regulatory landscape is emerging, and it becomes quite overwhelming at times. And so what I'm hoping here is with the governance discussion here is that it tries to create some foundational ways that whether you're a communication service provider or any company, that would help to frame these out. So can you help walk us through some of this?
Sure, and that's such a good question, and I'd be curious from responses or emoticons in the presentation, how many of you have started thinking about AI governance.
Yeah,
Well,
well, yeah,
if you haven't,
basically, yeah, that's, I think, well, I'm gonna have to admit, I mean, I'm my own company, we get it, but we just don't know where to start per se. I mean, it's like, we have other compliance things that we have to deal with, like HIPAA and SOC, and so there's like, well, what's it mean there? So that's hopefully, I think we can help get some of this going on our side here.
yeah, and I think it's many businesses are not sure where to start, so you're not alone. And a lot of businesses are taking sort of a whack-a-mole approach and seeing what's going to come forth. Um, and I think one of the problems is many businesses lack a clear AI strategy, and perhaps there is no oversight or accountability for AI stakeholders. We also are seeing employees going off and using AI technologies without being aware of the business and IT and data strategies. So I always tell my business clients, you just have to start somewhere. So you can go to the next slide. So having spent most of my career in-house, I know that it's often easier to think that, hey, we're not an AI company, so we don't need to pay attention to this. Even if your business is not active in this space yet, remember what we talked about with that competitive disadvantage thing. Your employees and your vendors are likely using AI. And so I recommend you start with one thing, and that is to create an AI oversight team. It's best if it's cross-functional, its members are well-versed in your business and IT strategies, and it's always helpful to have a lawyer. I know sometimes we think that the lawyers will come in and say no or what not to do, but the lawyers are there to be your problem solvers. And if they're anything like me, they're going to want to help you find a path forward to getting your business to where it wants to go. I view this also in two buckets and how to approach governance. So I think it's one, let's address the issue of employees. And then two, let's start looking at how you're using AI in your operations. Next slide.
Okay, well, okay, so two good buckets. So hey, you got individual employees, and then there's overall operations of the business. So in the employee category, Jack, this is a very curious, domain here about shadow AI, and maybe you can walk us through this a bit.
Yeah, happy to. First of all, we have to discuss what shadow IT means, and you're in IT, you probably already know what that is, but basically that's your employees using IT products that have not been approved by the company. For example, you may have an employee who doesn't like the tool that you provided to them, and they will bypass an API to get to their database. So there may come a time like when I was in-house where all of a sudden I have a company reaching out to me and said, you need to pay for 10 licenses that your development team is using. It's like, that's not an improved product. So now I have to get back to the development team and figure out what's going on. A lot of times companies will just say, hey, we're not going to fight this. Our employees want to use this other IT. We'll bring it in under the umbrella and control it. So like shadow IT, we're going to have shadow AI. And I'll make a provocative statement that we probably don't have too much shadow AI right now because there's so much use of AI without any kind of controls around it. Like I mentioned, the commercial with the phone. So it's so easy to use AI. And I saw a speaker, or I heard a speaker throw out some statistics that 70% of companies are thinking about using AI or using AI, and only 40% have thought about the governance part of that. So we're a little bit behind on controlling AI. So until you control it, there won't be shadow AI. But once you do put a program in place, there will likely be employees that want to use AI products that are not approved. And then that becomes shadow AI. And I see this as an ongoing battle within the company to understand, have an inventory of all AI being used within the company, and then whether it needs to be adopted or the employees need to be told that they can't use it.
Yeah. So hey, Jack, I think that's a key thing right there. As you indicated, the shadow IT tends to be a common understanding where, we have policies and procedures as a company, and they're there to make sure that everybody, our ducks are all in order. And if somebody just somehow feels that it's bogging them down, they go around it, and there you have it. But you indicated it's because there actually is a structure. And today, without any governance, then hyper technically there isn't any shadow AI, but it's the wild, wild west. So we're kind of it's not as necessary. It's not a good thing either, right? So hence a governance policy for it.
Right, and I saw that Joe asked, what are the consequences? One of the major consequences is litigation, and Susan's going to touch on that a little bit later with copyright and other areas. But I'll give you an example. So large companies get a lot of applications for open positions. And so if you're getting thousands of candidate applications for a position, boy, if I'm the employee trying to deal with those thousands of applications, wouldn't it be nice to apply AI to that? And all of a sudden, it's determined that there was a bias in the way things were being evaluated. For example, I saw one example with candidate review where the AI was only picking males for the position, so no female. So that's an obvious bias problem. And there's already litigation and employment area on bias, and then you add AI on top of that. So I expect to see a lot of litigation in the future as more AI is being used. So that's the main reason for controlling it.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Susan, what about operationally?
I think, one of the very first steps you can take on that employee bucket is to create an internal AI policy. And some considerations to think about when you're crafting that policy is, as an organization, what are you willing to allow your employees to use to increase productivity or to help them do something that they otherwise wouldn't be willing to do? Other things you may want to consider are, what applications are you comfortable with them using? So I know at some companies, they prohibit anyone putting confidential information into the AI database. And some companies that I know even prohibit using AI for call and Zoom recordings and AI note capture technologies, just because they're fearful of what might be said in meetings. Another practical consideration would be, what do the terms of use for your AI tools say? Do you want them to be able to train the models with what you're putting in them? And what does the limitation of liability say? And are you responsible for what your employees are doing? You also may want your employees to be very transparent with you when they use AI, so that you know that they use it as a tool. And then I think another key consideration is, you should make sure your customers are comfortable with you using AI when you do internal work for them to provide a deliverable, if you're a service organization, if you provide written products. So I think with the next slide, once you have that framework for the AI policy, you can socialize it with that AI oversight team I was talking about, and then you can roll it out. We can move to the next slide. It's important that you get your executives aligned on the policy and you're setting the tone at the top. Also, you should keep in mind that AI policies are not one and done. Technologies are rapidly changing just as we speak right now, and you should have a regular cadence to review the policy and update it to reflect your practices. Also, companies should train their employees. So I know lots of us have to take, when I was in house, I have to take annual training and watch videos and things like that. you should be training your employees about AI and driving home very key points. So as we talked about earlier, AI makes mistakes. I like to think about it as a junior intern. So you need to check the work. Anything you put into AI should be treated as if it's about to go viral. Make sure that you are getting IT's permission before you integrate any company software with AI. And you should also make sure you're not putting in personal information or images of customers or things of that nature into AI unless you're being transparent about it with them.
Yeah, the training thing here is really important because it's once again here's something that's blossomed onto the scene. It's really kind of taken hold. It's all over the place in terms of people's conversations, and maybe they dabbled in it or not. But like anything that is a tool, your skills and knowledge about how to use the tool, the training thing here seems to be really a watershed item, isn't it? I mean, how do you plan on people in your organization really to take full advantage of it, and also to know where they need to be more mindful in terms of what's going on, right? Okay. What do we got here? I got to get my slide to advance. And here we go. All right, so Jack, we're talking about operations. So there's an inventory concept here. Do you want to help talk about what do we mean by the inventory?
I'll actually take that one if it's okay with Jack. Companies are using AI more and more in their operations, like we discussed. And with the regulatory landscape, more governments are looking at imposing a risk-based approach. And so it's important that you create a detailed inventory and you know where and how you're using AI in your operations. So this is sort of the start of your AI by design. So if you're a privacy attorney, you understand privacy by design. It's a construct where you know what you have, what types of risks this AI presents, how it is regulated, what you can and can't do with it, what data sources you're using, and where it is in your IT pipeline. You can also use this list as a way to help you innovate and for compliance purposes and doing risk assessments for your systems, identifying gaps, determining if you need human oversight, making sure there are defined processes to check the safety and bias potential of these systems before you put it into market. Or if you already put it into market, go back and make changes to the system that you've already rolled out. So those are the things that I think you need to consider.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Jack, so with all that together, there's an interesting area called risk management frameworks, and once again, trying to create this corporate governance on AI. Can you help us walk through with what the RMF means?
Sure. And most companies probably already have risk management frameworks in place for cybersecurity and privacy. So this is an add-on to those existing risk management frameworks. For example, if you're a NIST shop, you have the NIST CSF 2.0 right now, or ISO. If you're ISO shop, you have ISO 27001 for cybersecurity. And then there's privacy risk management frameworks that go along with those. So this would just be an extension of that. And what we're trying to do with these frameworks is make sure that the AI is operating as expected, legal in a fair manner, and the results are explainable and transparent. And I saw a question in the chat about how do you handle transparency? One way is to let the user know through a notice that AI is being used, and some of the laws will require this depending on the risk of the AI, and then give the user an option for whether they want to appeal the result. Maybe they can say, I don't want the AI result, I want a human to look at it. I see we're on the next slide. So a risk score is the same with cybersecurity. risk, right? It's the harm multiplied by the likelihood of the risk happening. So there's always risk. There's risk with business, right? So AI is along those lines. And I already mentioned combining security and privacy risk with AI risk. And we've talked a lot about this has to be pro-innovation. The reason you're using AI is to take advantage of the efficiencies of AI. And I will stop there and mention that you shouldn't adopt AI just because you want to have an AI product. You need to do a business analysis and make sure it's the right thing for your company. Moving on to the next slide. So risks are context specific and should be handled as such. And you need to do an impact assessment. In other words, I'm adding AI. What's the impact on my company? And a great place to start with that is if you already done a privacy impact assessment, start with that because they're very similar. And then the risk management frameworks, some bullet points there. And you're going to get to slides, so I'm not going to read these bullet points to you. Next slide, please. So here are some of the frameworks that are available. And, if you're a NIST shop, then you will want to go with NIST. If you're an ISO shop, you'll want to go with ISO. And the nice thing about having these frameworks in place, too, is that when it gets to contractual negotiations and a customer asks, well, what risk management framework do you have in place? And if you can say, I have this or that, depending on whether it's ISO or NIST, that's shorthand for, we're likely in compliance because we have these risk management frameworks in place. Next slide. So this is just a real top level look at the NIST AI risk management framework that's been put out. And I should mention that NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They implement a lot of the standards and they work with the White House to in putting these standards in place. Generative AI, this just came out in July of this year, and this is specific to generative AI and is kind of an add-on to the NIST AI RMF. And I expect a lot more coming out of NIST where they'll be more specific to industry. And perhaps they'll even come out with one for communications. I don't know if they're working on that or not. As with any risk that you discover in your business, you want to prioritize those risks and then attack the risks that are the highest or the most critical. And as I mentioned already, it's an overall umbrella of cybersecurity, privacy, and AI risk. These all need to be integrated together. They're not standalone risk programs.
So Jack, in terms of the NIST environment and so forth with ISO, there seems to be a lot there, right? So there's some links in here in the deck that our audience can take a peek at to help them unpack what NIST and ISO are doing. So thank you on that.
Right. And I will say NIST does a great job of providing tools to implement their risk management frameworks. If you've never done an RMF, don't let it intimidate you. Go out to NIST, get the playbook, get the tools they have. They have a nice spreadsheet where you can just march down through each row, and it basically guides you through every step of creating your risk management framework. I really recommend NIST. ISO is more of a European standard. The difference between NIST and ISO, you will have a third-party audit of that, and you either pass or you don't, and you get certified or you don't. With NIST, there's different levels of compliance. So nobody's going to be at 100 miles per hour the first day, and that's what I like about NIST. You can go from 0 to 100 over time. And I think if you get into trouble with AI, it's going to be good to have some kind of documentation that says you're trying and what you're trying to do to get to 100.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, and I'm passionate for other people here, just having a reference place, a template, a ability to structurally walk through those things would be invaluable. So thanks for that. Susan, what about any other areas of consideration here?
I'm sure. So the company I'm working with is also creating their own model. So they're taking the data, and some of the things to think about it is how accurate is the data you're training your model with? Do you need to license the data? Uh, what about privacy preserving techniques and security? And then again, back to that governance, what oversight does your own model need? And are you including enough training materials to help prevent bias? We could go to the next slide. So another key thing that you should be thinking about in this space are your vendors. And I know most of you do due diligence and you do the risk assessment of your vendor. You're checking licenses, and it's always good to ask them if they're using personal information in their models. I think it's also very helpful to look at the provisions in the contract, and some of the key provisions would be strong compliance with the laws. Um, you also want to make sure you're addressing both the inputs and the outputs of data. So the inputs, you're going to be looking at more of the data security and privacy and how the vendor is using the data, and of course, data breach protections. And then for the outputs, you're going to be mainly focusing on ownership. So who owns those outputs that are generated by the services? So that will mean that you'll need strong IP clauses. Another key consideration is your limitation of liability. A lot of vendors are trying to shift the liability. So you may want to make sure you're negotiating that point so at least there's balance, or you're in a stronger position, and making sure you have good indemnification rights in case of a third party claim. Then the last thing is this may not be the product or service you want to have price escalation clauses in, because if the pricing goes through the roof, you may not be able to keep up. So you want to look for that and limit that. We can go to the next slide. So advertising, so it's it's a best practice to disclose that AI was used in advertising. You should also look at the terms of service for social media platforms that you're on, because many of them require that you're transparent. Again, AI is a new technology and the law is being applied to the technology. And it's, of course, advertising 101 that you should not misrepresent what your product can do. We're seeing the FTC has been pursuing companies that are engaged in AI watching, which is just really over exaggerating what your product can do. So if you're making a performance claim, for example, you have increased efficiency, you must be able to substantiate that with objective evidence. So make sure that's in the file. Another hot button issue for the FTC is using AIs to write reviews. It shouldn't be used to write fake reviews. And then we also see the FCC that's weighing in on requiring disclosures if it's a political ad. And then they're working on the proceeding now about rules for AI generated robocalls. And then just you want to make sure that whatever you're including in your advertising, it's licensed and that you have the appropriate rights. So just more on copyright. This is a really big topic. We probably could have a whole webinar just on this. And it's really the battle between the companies that are using this third-party data and these third parties. So New York Times, Westlaw, they want you to buy their license and they don't want people to just be scraping. The developers are saying that they need this third-party copyrighted data because the public domain and licensed data is insufficient for the vast amount of data they need for training. So the argument goes, without copyrighted data and training data sets, we wouldn't have what we need for today or tomorrow's generative AI breakthroughs. And of course, as I mentioned, the copyright holders want the data to be licensed. It's really coming down to whether it's a fair use. So whether or not it's okay if they're looking at, is generative AI replicating copyrighted materials, or are they creating something new? And then I think another defense that we're seeing is expression dichotomy, and they're saying that the data is too fragmented to be copyrighted, so it doesn't enjoy copyright protection. There's a case in Delaware where Thomas Reuters is suing Ross Intelligence, and it's all about whether the AI legal research tool Ross Intelligence used content from Westlaw as training without authorization. And their main argument on the fair use side is that it's being used for a marketing purpose that would otherwise have to be licensed. And then we're also seeing that another example is a California case involving Concord Music Group and Anthropic. And Anthropic is being alleged to have used unauthorized music lyrics to train Claude. So we see that this is an interesting case because the plaintiff is actually moving for a preliminary injunction, so they want them to stop the use, while the defendant has actually filed a motion to dismiss. So it's just one to watch. And then also you're seeing new contracts pop up in public. For example, publishers are now requiring libraries to sign content license agreements that prevents them from using content to train AI tools, and others are charging additional fees to do so. So there's just a lot in this copyright space.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Susan. Well, hey, we're coming to the close here. We've covered a lot of ground, and thought we maybe could kind of summarize some things for the group. We did cover a lot of things. So once again, as I start to ponder this thing, it's kind of, once it becomes somewhat overwhelming, right? Because there's so much to think about. But then as I start to level set a bit more, each business that's out there has some structural frameworks about how they're trying to run their business and where they have a compliance activity, how they engage and train their employees. And so one of the refreshing things here is that the AI thing asks us to revisit them, and then revisit them because it would be good to revisit it, but now with this light of what does AI mean and how could it be used for the good or for the bad. So perhaps Jack and Susan, if you want to kind of take us home here in terms of the key things about what we covered here today.
Sure. We have the bullet points listed on the slides. I would also add, and you've mentioned it, Mark, training is huge. You have to train and then train again and then train again, because your employees don't understand the risk of AI. They may not even understand that they're using AI. I have seen this in person where an employee goes off and says, "Oh, I just did this neat thing," and they're not even thinking about they're using AI. Human oversight is huge. You just can't put AI out there to your employees and walk away. Somebody has to be watching it and making sure it's operating properly, and have the authority to shut it down when it goes astray. And then to Susan's point on copyright, I would ask your AI vendors, do they have a copyright safe harbor? Some of them will have that, where they'll protect you against copyright litigation.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question that came through. It's pretty interesting. I'll take it back to earlier discussion on bias. So we're all biased in some way. Ellen, thanks for your question. So the question read, given we all have bias, should we expect that AI will have no bias? Or, I mean, that's, right? Or what level of bias is acceptable? Any thoughts on that?
No,
I mean,
I think
because the idea is that there's going to be bias in there, right? So how do you kind of, square with that?
I'll defer to Jack, but I do think that his point about human oversight, it's critical to make sure that the folks who are operating the model are looking at it and making sure that there's enough training data, they're testing it, and they're trying to address some of the biases that might be in that data.
Yeah, I agree that you'll never have zero bias. That's why you need human monitoring to when things get out of whack bias wise, that you replace the model with they call it a challenger model. So you have a champion model that you're using with your AI, and at the same time you have a red team that's looking at creating another model, and you keep comparing the two models to see when the biases get too bad. Then you replace the model with the challenger model, and it's going to be an ongoing process, right? These red teams should constantly be evaluating the AI for bias. So again, it's not a put it in place and walk away and assume it's going to heal itself. It can get out of whack, it can hallucinate, and it can get to the point where it can't get back to where it's operating reasonably. Susan said an intern. I think of it as a 5-year-old, and only because I heard someone else say that, but that's kind of my view of AI at the moment. It's great, but it's not fully cooked yet.
So it's a savant 5-year-old. Is that it? There you go. So okay, so we're at the top of our hour here, and it's been a good conversation. I have one question here, and I got some closing comments. So one question is that, hey, we all have certain compliance. I might have mentioned this before. We have to get certified on SOC, HIPAA, things like that. Is there any movement in those domains where they're saying, hey, this is what AI you have to now think about? Because, HIPAA, we're communication companies. We have the privilege to work with healthcare organizations or just transactional stuff. So you mentioned privacy and things like that. Has there been more explicit examples of that in these certification processes? Anybody have any? You guys happen to bump into that at all?
Well, if you're going to comply with the risk management frameworks, you will be doing some of that work. And, with the Colorado law, it's if you're under AG enforcement and you have put an ISO or NIST risk management framework in place, that can be an affirmative defense to that action.
Okay, very good. Well, I would like to thank Susan and Jack for you guys to help to walk through this today, and for everybody who attended. The presentation will be made available as well as the recording. The other thing in terms of what the CCA is doing is that because this is such a slippery noodle, for lack of a better word, and these frameworks of governance are important. Stay tuned. We're going to be publishing basically it's the idea here of what's the best practice and what is mandatory. What is the coalescing of these concepts and taking from the standards areas like NIST and so forth, that we can advance guidance to our members as to, hey, this is a playbook, best practice approach to this topic, and keeping it freshed up for as time goes by. Joe, I don't know if you had anything else to wrap up our session with here today.
Oh, no, guys, just a great session. This AI, there's a lot of opportunity here, but there's a lot of risk. But I guess the best opportunities are always there when there's a risk involved. So if you can manage your risk, I think you're going to see the rewards. So thank you, guys. Thank you all for just a great presentation today. Have a great holiday. Have a great rest of the week. And we'll see you at Cloud Connections in St. Pete in April.